Let's do a quick question here. This is from a longtime listener, not going to say the name, but somebody who's been a big supporter over the years, so you know who you are. Thank you. Question reads, so I've been a follower of yours for a time, and as somebody who has dealt with depression, I found your works both helpful and inspiring for general betterment. I realize you're not my therapist, but your works have improved my life just the same. Thank you. My question is, I'm dealing with the recent loss of someone close, and while I acknowledge that everyone deals with loss in their own way, I find that I bring up and reference fond memories of this person quite often. Is this indicative of an inability to move on? While I realize these should not be shared with all, does this mean that internalizing is acceptable or potentially detrimental? Yeah, very good question. You're totally correct that grief and bereavement, loss, these things do work different for everybody. There are kind of those stages of grief that you see sometimes, from anger to bargaining, eventually acceptance, all of those things. And there's a lot of validity to those, but they definitely don't go in a linear fashion. In my experience, people hop all over when it comes to bereavement and grief through those different stages, and sometimes other ones will come back up. In general, there's nothing wrong with remembering somebody, and especially if you're remembering them fondly. Often it's bittersweet when you think about the loss of somebody in the life that they had, what they represented. There's a lot of good feelings there, but it also stings because this person's gone now. Ultimately, there's nothing that is going to bring the person back, but talking about them and remembering them in a fond way keeps them alive in your heart, so to speak. People have a lasting impression that stays with you, and I think that's really great. So bringing up fond memories of them quite often, especially if it's a recent loss, is not a bad thing. I think one of the areas that we sometimes run into trouble is avoidance. If you think about issues like trauma, for instance, meaning capital T trauma, PTSD, things like that. Often those are maintained by avoidance. We don't want to experience the feelings that come along with either experiencing a trigger or thinking about a triggering topic, and so we avoid it. But that makes the reaction build up more. It makes it stronger. It reinforces that sense that thoughts or various stimuli related to the thing that traumatized us is dangerous. It reinforces that loop. And instead, often what's required is exposure of some type. Now, for you, when it's somebody close to you that you've lost to death, exposure is often talking about them, doing things that are related to them, like going to places you used to go to together, handling their things, even seeing things on social media about them. Often we have ceremonial things like funerals, different services like that. So I actually think that, especially in the early periods of losing somebody, talking about them and remembering them a lot is a good thing, because every time you do, that weakens that tendency for your brain to try to lock up those memories in a very kind of scary box in your brain. And instead, it becomes a normal part of your experience, right? And you don't ever get over somebody passing. It's not like one day it doesn't matter to you at all. It's that, continuing to move forward in your life kind of dulls the edges of the pain that's there, and it becomes a bittersweet thing. And, you start to get used to living in the context of life without this person. And I think that's what you're starting to do. You're remembering them fondly. You're thinking about them. In some cases, maybe you're talking about them, and that keeps them a present part of your life. And at the same time, you're also living your life. It doesn't come to a full halt. And I think that is something that potentially is actually quite healthy. Now, if they're all you can talk about, again, if it's pretty early on, I can understand that. If it's, a year down the line and it's still always the most present thing on your mind, that could potentially be concerning, because that would make it hard for you to just live your day-to-day life. But, when you talked about is internalizing acceptable or potentially detrimental, I think that it depends. Right? Internalizing in a way where you're actually actively kind of thinking and processing, like if you're sitting down and journaling about this person, or you're going through and allowing yourself to remember things, and it's kind of an intentional, conscious act, there's nothing wrong with that. If you are shoving these thoughts and feelings away, that could be potentially detrimental. That's where we get into that trauma territory and that avoidance loop that I was talking about. You also mentioned that, you feel like it shouldn't be brought up or shared with all. Potentially, this is personal stuff. This is stuff that maybe you're not going to share with every stranger in your life, but for those that you are close to, or those who are willing to listen, there's absolutely nothing wrong with talking about a person who's passed. The more we kind of keep it taboo, I think the more power grief has over us. And grief is important, to be clear. It's not that you want to avoid grief. It's that you want to pass through it in a way that is healthy, in a way that is helpful for you in the end. So I would talk about this person. Talk about them with your family or people that are close to you. If you have a therapist or any sort of coach figure in your life, that's also okay. If you want to write about them for yourself or for others, all of that's okay. You're not doing anything wrong. If this is impacting your life in a way that's unhelpful, definitely consider that. But otherwise, what you're describing is just fine. So thank you for writing in. I hope this gives you a little bit of reassurance. And again, thank you for your support.